Welcome, everyone, to the Secure AF podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Kimmitt. I have with me Tanner Shinn, and we're going to have a topic that's actually a part two of something we did together a couple of weeks ago on a national radio show on the Voice America Network, and it's specifically talking about protecting our families. And it was a really interesting conversation that we had, and I had a lot of fun on it. I hope you did too. But one of the things that I found most interesting is we had a lot of feedback. I had a lot of feedback where people had never thought about this problem, and they'd never considered that your family, your kids, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings could be an attack vector getting into an organization. And so that's why we did it. That's why we had that particular conversation, and people really liked it. I really liked it. But we wanted to have part two. We wanted to have the second part where we talked about all the things that could go wrong, but let's talk about the things that you could do well, or you can do to protect your family, that you can do to protect your organization. So to recap it a little bit, Tanner, give us just I know I didn't prepare you for this, but give us just a little bit of ways you can attack a family. So as a pen tester, if you were going to attack a family, or if you were, a malicious person, what are just 2 or 3 ways that you would go in to attack an organization through a family member?
Yeah, absolutely. So reaching out to, spouses is a big one, through phone calls, emails, even in person. Anything that you can do to get an emotional response is always going to be good for getting information from people. Tricking somebody into something, if you can get them to that heightened emotional state, and who better than family to elicit that. So you could just call, spoof it from, if I was, to reach out to your wife, I could spoof the Alias main number and be like, hey, this is so-and-so, I work with Jonathan, there's been an accident, we need this information, we're getting him to the hospital.
Yep.
Probably going to get it. Maybe not with your family, but with most, you're probably going to get it.
If I had to really think about it, though, I would kind of want my family to give that information if I'm hurt or if I'm non-responsive. And so, it really is that emotional breakdown of they're trying to do something good. You kind of want them to do something good, but then a malicious actor is going to turn around and do something bad with that. So absolutely. And that's where the difficulty comes in, because a lot of people they want to keep separate that emotional connection to something, i.e. the vulnerability, and their professional lives.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the malicious actors, the attackers, they don't care about that. They're going to take the advantage where they can. So yeah, no, I would agree. I would hope that, my wife would, tell you to go smack a bug, if you were to call and do stuff like that. But I also am very paranoid and try to do as best I can to do the things we're talking about today with my family, to make sure that they are aware that these things are possible.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a common thing. Is I'm probably going to refer. I don't have children. I'm not on that side of it, but I'll probably keep referring back to what do you do, as I think it's probably a pretty solid blueprint for the most part.
Yeah. I hope so. I'm sure I could do better. I'm sure we could all do better. But that's the whole point of this conversation: is what can we do better?
Right.
So, let's talk about that, since you brought up wives or spouses. I think you're right. I think that they can be a target for malicious actors. And one of the things that I tell people is, in an organization, you might go through security awareness training, hopefully on a regular basis, but my spouse doesn't.
Right.
And because of that, I have to do that security awareness training for her. Now, I'm pretty paranoid just because that's my job. And so I try to relay that information. But, let's talk about that. What would you like to see, from that attacker's mindset, even just organizational mindset? What do you want us to see to do different in our families, specifically with the spouse?
Well, just making sure they know that it's even a possibility that people could be using them to get to, compromising you or your business or anything like that. They might call you and, try to do even something as think about how often tech support scams happen. Mm-hmm. It's a $1 billion industry. There are huge, companies in India and even other places, largely India right now, where they have call centers, and that's what they do is they do these tech support scams. Think about how many computers they're remoting into. I mean, now if that was somebody's computer, they had cached credentials for their corporate Outlook or their corporate O365, or they had VPN credentials or something like that cached.
Yeah.
It's a computer they commonly both use or something like that. I mean, that's a very realistic one because it happens so much.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't usually go that route. They're just doing gift card scams, but it wouldn't be much for them to go ahead and dump Chrome credentials and take that and sell that on the dark web.
Well, and that goes along with a lot of the things we started seeing during COVID was this mix between using organizational computers and home computers. And I'm very against that. I think that you should only do work on corporate maintained or organizationally maintained and secured computers, never at home. If you're at home, you should be on a VPN doing work. I mean, all those different things. You want to protect that environment, that ecosystem that you're working on. If you're mixing it with home use, personal use, it becomes really clouded. But once the attacker gets on, because honestly, home computers are probably less protected than most organizational computers. Maybe they don't have any sort of EDR or MDR. You may not have a firewall at home. You have multiple people on the computer that may click on something in their email. So there's a lot of risk that's following that. So I think there's some technical things you can do in terms of separating the two, but also just that awareness of, hey, this is a possibility. I mean, I think, we talk about how we need to train our children or teach our children about these risks and these threats. But I think it goes even to the point of, my wife probably doesn't necessarily want to hear about my job. I probably don't even want to tell her about my job, because once I get home, I want to think about my family, think about karate, think about all the things I want to do that may not be the stuff that I had to think about for 8 or 10 hours before.
Right.
But I think it is appropriate to, talk to your loved ones about some of these things that we deal with every day in the cybersecurity field. So what kinds of things would you relay? I mean, you have a significant other. What do you relay to her as relates to the bad things that are out there? I'm sure she gets to hear some stories of, the types of things that you hear, the DEF CON at Black Hat, stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I literally trust nobody. That's basically, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that she gets enough of the paranoia through just hearing the stuff that I do. Seeing stuff where we might be sitting there and we might want to play a prank on one of our friends and spoof a phone number from an app on the phone and start sending text messages and just messing with people. And she's like, "That's you can do this." Yeah. Like I'm like, yeah. Oh yeah, this is easy. Yeah, we do way more than this. Like, yeah. I know, and I have her. I'll set up a phishing site or something like that. I'm like, "Hey, does this look legit?" And she's just like, "Is this not real?" Like, it's, so I think that through that, she definitely gets enough paranoia. But let me tell you what I would say in my perfect world. No, this is probably going to happen for most people, but in my perfect world, what I would do as a corporation for families. So I would do make security awareness training available. Yes. It's a very hard sell to your spouse or your kids that, hey, do security awareness training through my work. Like, that's a hard sell. I know it's probably not going to happen for the most part.
Okay, so I'm going to want to add to that real quick because in my previous role as a CISO of an organization, I'm CISO here as well, but previous organization, I went with a security awareness training provider that I don't want to say names, I don't give out names and stuff on the podcast, but they made one of the selling points for me was that you could share the videos with your loved ones. So, I would pass it out to my employees, the employees of the organization, but I would always tell them, like, hey, these are really good short videos, 3-5 minutes, whatever they are, but share them with people. Send them to your grandparents, send them to your spouses, send them to your kids, as long as they're old enough to understand kind of what's going on, but send it to them so they're aware of these current attacks or this current issue or this current, we talk about security awareness training once a year in terms of October. And I tried to make sure that all of our families with the tools that we had was available all the time. Right. But I really liked that product because it gave us the ability to just take the link and go, hey, wife, Catherine, go do the, go take a look at this and watch it. This is really, really important. So I really think that that's a value add to a lot of those products. And I would like to see more of that type of thing added to the security awareness training the organizations get.
Yeah. I would like to see it go even further, though. I would like to see phishing and vishing even expanded to families.
Yes.
I would like to see possibly even on pen testing that targeted spear phishing, red teaming type of stuff to even put it into play. Another thing is we have a couple customers that are doing executive assessments now, so we're going to, big, very large companies, Fortune 500 companies, usually who's interested in this. They have, a list of executives, and we go to their house and we go, okay, are your cameras set up this way? Let me look at your home network. Let me scan it. Let me see what you have on the outside. Let me look if you yourself have elite credentials anywhere. Did your MyFitnessPal account get compromised? Did you ever you reuse that password?
Right.
And it's basically like a lightweight pen test that we do on the person.
Yep.
And I think those are super valuable for high value targets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to do that in my previous job. I'd do some personal CISO work on the side. That's what I called it, personal CISO, where I'd come in and be a CISO of a household. I'd come in and ask questions of, what kind of passwords do you have? How good or bad are they? Where do you store them at? Let's go take a look at your accounts. Let's look at the inventory on your wireless access point, all these different things. But it goes along with that of making sure your environment is as secure or more secure than what we did in our organization. The same concepts. I mean, we're doing the same steps. The idea of pen testing the family, we've had a couple of customers that have done that. And from an organizational point of view, it's really important to understand what your risks are. And if there is a risk to go through the family to get to the organization needs to know that. Yeah,
absolutely. Those are the type of things whenever it's gloves off, hey, you can target the family, you can do all these things. That's the most realistic scenarios.
Absolutely.
Because, the people attacking, they do not care. I could go on about that for days. I was about to go on a tangent about it, but let's stay a little on topic.
Well, I think that that's legitimate though, because again, no holds barred. You have to know what the risks. As a CISO, I need to know those risks. I need to know those risks in the organization. And I mean, I think we have to get past this mindset that the family is off limits, because you're right. The attackers don't care.
Yep.
I had a court case years ago that I was involved in, and the district attorney that I was dealing with came to me and says, listen, FYI, there is some really bad people on the other side of this court case, and your family may be involved in this. And I'm like, what do you mean? And I knew what he was talking about, but thinking about my family involved in that put a new spin on the actual court case, but it was the absolute truth. And I think that we have to start thinking that way from an organizational level of families are in scope now. Now there's a lot of things that, I don't want my wife involved in that. I don't want my kids involved in that. That's scary. I mean, that really is scary. Why do you think that's so scary? So, I mean, I have my thoughts, but I wanted to get your thoughts. Why is that scary for people?
Probably because they know it'll work. I think everybody kind of knows what their vulnerabilities are to an extent. People know the type of things that will elicit a response from them. And I think, like I said, family is always one of those that's pretty much always your number one.
Yeah.
So it's something you want to keep them safe, although doing the pen test or, targeting them for that stuff is keeping them safe. But it's almost like putting them to martial arts and putting them through sparring, where you're watching them, get hit, and you're watching them do this. It's keeping them safe. They're going to learn how to handle these conditions and these things. But it's almost the same thing.
Yeah,
in a much less physical way, of course. But,
yes. I also think it's embarrassment.
Oh yeah,
and,
yeah, totally.
You don't want, and I'm sure that if I tricked my wife into doing something, or if you were to pen test me and you tricked my wife into doing it, she would be embarrassed, and then I'm going to have to deal with that. However, I think that if we take the stigma out of it, if we say, hey, the whole point is to get better. I mean, just like martial arts training. I do martial arts training. That may be why you brought that up. But I teach, and when I teach students, specifically my family, I was like, hey, this stuff is possible. This can happen. So I'm doing that defense awareness training to them, and to let them know, is like, yes, this is bad stuff, but let me show you how to block it. Let me show you how to defend against it. Let's work on it. Let's drill it. Let's practice it. I think that's really, really important. Even from the mindset, it's really important because it breaks down that embarrassment. It breaks down that hesitancy to do it. And then the pen test part of it is just the test afterward. It's, can you do the sparring during the test? Can you do this? But during the pen test is, can you get phished? Do you have bad password? All these normal things that we do during a pen test.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess let me give you a counter argument I heard recently. It's kind of a funny story. I'll try to make it a little bit more appropriate for the podcast. It's there was a company that was phishing, smishing, I guess, rather. They're so text message phishing. They were sending, for those who aren't aware, you got phishing, email, smishing, text message, vishing, which is voice calls. This was smishing. They were texting his personal number. And it was like not a very good fish. So, he responded with a very, very well-known inappropriate picture that you would probably get immediately let go for an organization for sending. A picture that will mentally scar you. And they ended up calling him in like, hey, could you not respond to this? And he goes, hey, could you not text my personal number, this crap? So what's your take on that? Where it's, you're reaching out to the personal number and, especially if they don't know, something like that. But I mean, what's your thought on that? Is, this is my personal number. You don't pay for this number. You shouldn't be messing with me on it.
I mean,
extending to families.
So that was a hard one because that's BYOD, and that's my argument for BYOD. However, that is still a risk. There's a risk that he could be compromised through that phone number, responding. Now, I would say that if he appropriately responded to the attack, that he did it in a way that protected himself, he did it in a way that protected the organization and protected his family, even though it was offensive to someone, I'm okay with that. As long as he didn't give up a password, he didn't respond to it, whatever. Because, I mean, think about it. What if we had a situation where I was doing the smishing? Everyone understand what that stands for, the SMS phishing anyway. But what if I was trying to do like sex extortion? Send me a picture and I'll send you one of mine, or vice versa, or whatever. And that gives people where they'll send them a picture and then they start getting extorted and all this other stuff. That is that's an attack. That happens all of the time, every day. You have to know that someone is susceptible to that and the risks of that happening. And if you don't test it, I mean, you have to make sure that they understand what the policy is. Yeah. But honestly, if someone texted me randomly on my personal phone and I sent something back randomly, again, as long as I didn't, introduce anything illegal or, compromise it, who cares? Just because the organization got offended at it, well, he didn't put you at risk and it was his personal phone.
Right. Yeah. It's just, I guess the question for where the dilemma came in for me is, you are unwillingly forcing them to use their personal property for corporate uses at that point.
Yes.
And so I think you mentioned what it comes down to is it has to be policy, right?
Yes, it has to be policy. Now, I'm a big supporter of BYOD, of not allowing BYOD. Your BYOD policy is don't let BYOD happen. That should not be, you shouldn't let people put organizational data or do organizational work on personally owned devices. That's my personal belief. That's what I support on my clients, is don't allow BYOD. Because you have these gray areas. Well, that's his phone, but there's data going on there. He has access to the system or whatever. That's problematic. If you have a policy of you just don't get that. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't test on their personal phones, because the attackers are going to do that. Again, think about that. It's that sextortion, the sex extortion stuff. If I can attack someone on their personal phone at home, get them to send me a picture, and then say, all right, we have this picture. I'm going to post it on your Facebook if you don't give us the passwords to your organization. Oh, by the way, we're also going to make you do your MFA because your MFA is on your phone. So when that comes up, just hit accept for us. I mean, that's a valid technique to attack an organization, and attackers absolutely do that.
I have personally done that.
Yeah. And it works.
Yeah, it's very effective. Yeah.
So
it's one of the, that before we learned about, using Evil Engine X and some of that stuff, we can do a whole talk about that. Maybe we'll at some other point. But that was the only way I really knew how to get past MFA, was call them and social engineer them into hitting it. And I think it's probably still the easiest way.
Oh, probably. Yeah. I would say it is. But think about all those other attacks that you can do with that. If that is that successful of just trying, think about that fear tactic. And now, again, I don't want to dive down into the BYOD thing, because I am very passionate about that. I don't think you should have BYOD in organizations. I know the cost savings. I know all that stuff, that argument, but there's a risk there. But what we're trying to talk about today is specifically the risk of the personal devices, of their home phone, of the family, of the kids. And speaking of kids, I mean, kids are that unique thing because they're kids. I mean, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But again, if you attack them from a cybersecurity perspective, get them to give you information, get the password, or to click and download something, that's one that's a very, if let's say I'm in a Roblox game and I have convinced a 7-year-old to download and install an update to the game, but it's actually doing bad stuff on the computer that's now on the personal network, that's now scanning and doing other things, that's probably using the same password as you use for other computers, I now have access to an internal network.
I could very easily develop a Roblox miner that makes Ethereum in the background or Monero in the background, and it'll give you 1% of the Monero you mine as Robux, and I bet you every 7-year-old on Roblox would install that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Without question.
Yeah.
Now, how do we defend against that? And we kind of talked about this on the way to lunch today. Wanted to cover some of the topics that we were going to do. But let's talk about kids. So knowing that that's a risk, knowing that you've got, you may have 3 or 4 kids, maybe 2 kids, whatever, but they may have their own computers, they may have their own laptops, their iPads, whatever. They're all playing these games. I can't think of all the games, but, there's Roblox and there's
Minecraft.
There's Minecraft, yeah. I mean, I know my kids, there's a dozen different games that they play. So let's talk about first the security awareness stuff. So let's not necessarily talk about the attacks yet. Let's talk about just what kinds of things would you like to see us teaching kids from a very early age, so the first time that they get a computer. What should be some of the stuff that we should teach them?
Well, I think a lot of this stuff from the early days of the internet, right, which is you don't ever tell anybody your name, you don't ever tell anybody where you're from, you don't ever tell them if you're male or female, you don't tell them anything. That was what I mean. In the year 2002, that's what you told children about the internet.
Yep.
Nowadays,
that's what I told adults about the internet.
That's what I still tell adults about the internet. But nowadays, how many children do you know under the age of 10 that have social media?
Oh, yeah. How
many parents made it for them? I mean, it's so common. It's so common. It's incredibly common. And it breaks literally every one of those rules.
Yeah.
And I mean, is the internet safer than it was? No. I'd argue it's worse. If you look at, and this isn't so much on the topic of the corporate security stuff, but if you look at the place where, I know a few hackers that are involved in bringing pedophiles to justice, and there's a couple really good organizations that are doing stuff like that. And you'd think like, oh yeah, these hackers, they're in the dark web. No, they're on Instagram. Oh yeah, they're making fake profiles on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and they're not seeding the dark web for these things. This is 90% of this stuff is happening on social media. Yeah, it's a dangerous place.
Well, I mean, most of the attacks are social attacks nowadays.
Yeah.
I'm going to date myself, but when I was younger adult, To Catch a Predator was the big thing on TV. I can't think of the guy's name, but he'd be standing in the kitchen. There you go. He'd be standing in the kitchen. The predator would come in, and they would talk to him. He'd leave. They get arrested. But
have a seat right there.
Right. But that was before I had kids,
Mm-hmm.
and I was looking at it of, well, number one, you're getting these people off the street. That's a great thing. Number two, how stupid can they be?
Very.
But now I have kids, and I'm like, these people are out there. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had, 2 or 3 people every week in the episode. So you start extrapolating that out of how many are out there. And then my kids are online. And so from the very early on, I taught them the exact same thing. You don't use your real name. Don't talk to people online. Have good passwords. I mean, my 4-year-old had to have a password to get onto the tablets that they had, the little Amazon tablet things that they had. So I made them learn how to have a good passcode on that, or a password on that. So you teach them these things to kind of protect them, because you're not always going to be there, especially not always going to be there online with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny. One of my daughters came to me, and I did not know this at the time, but she was going to go meet one of her friends online in, I think, a Roblox game or something. So we put, during COVID, we got them access to this. It's basically a school program online for just extra social interaction with people. So they were taking a Roblox course, and they were meeting people in this class, but then they wanted to go have a play date online. But my kids wouldn't talk to them online because I had taught them you don't talk to people online. And so they wouldn't talk to their friends, so they couldn't do that. And so I had to, go back to them. It's like, okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know this person outside, you met them in class in a safe environment, and you know who they are, they give you their name, sure, you could talk to them, just be really careful. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that they did that, because number one, it showed that my paranoia is rubbed off on them. That's a good thing. But number two, I didn't have to stay on top of them every single time. A new situation arose. They took that old lesson that I had taught them. It's like, oh, we don't talk to people online. And then they refused to talk. So I had to go back in and work with them. So I was a very proud daddy that day, mm-hmm. because they took that lesson to heart. Now, I also gave them computers very early on. They had access to that, and I didn't want to restrict their access to that, but I wanted them to learn those lessons.
So I'll play, devil's advocate a little bit here. So I'll date myself as well. So internet relay chat,
IRC.
age 14, 13, I don't know. I've met some people who are lifelong friends.
Yeah.
I mean, so, there's something to be said about, what do you say about that? Are you can you be too safe and miss out on opportunities? Now, to be fair, we didn't know each other's names until we had known each other for like 8 years. So that's the other side of that coin. But
okay, so I agree. And I met a lot of people on AIM and IRC and all those different ones that we used to have all those years ago. I look at it like this. So when my wife and I got married, we would have these conversations about our kids and what we were going to do with raising kids, which I think all couples will do at some point, especially if they think about having kids, or adopting or whatever it may be. But one of the things that I always talked about was, if my kids become black belts under me, by the time they get to 16, I won't put curfews, I won't put dress codes, anything like that on them. And she always thought that was funny, and she kind of thought of it from the point of view of, oh, they're a black belt, they can do it. It's like, no. It's not the point about being the black belt. It's that it's the discipline and decision making.
Yeah.
If I train them and I teach them how to make good decisions, all the way up to they're 16, and they've done the discipline, they've gotten the black belt, they've done all this other stuff, then I hope that I can trust their decision making. And based off the whole issue from earlier, that they were hesitant to even talk to their friends online, that, again, that may be a little bit far in on paranoia, but it's the decision-making that I care about. It's they are hesitant. Now, was I that hesitant when I was on IRC all those years ago? No.
Right.
I was paranoid.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, so don't give out names. Don't put names out that people can know who you are because they don't want to find you. So I was very hesitant on that, even when I was doing it back all those years ago. I think that if we teach them that stuff now, that if they learn it and are careful, then you can give them that little bit of leeway so they can make, I mean, and my kids have, they have made friends online. Mostly it's they've connected in some other way, but then they have grown. My daughter had friends all over the country from her class. But then she had people that were here that moved away. And she still stays in touch with them online.
Right.
And they even do Zoom calls with each other. So I think the technology has given them the ability to better communicate and better interact. And that's great. But we still got to be that there's got to be that paranoia there. There could be those malicious actors that are going after those kids because they're on these tools and because you can take advantage of them. So that's kind of the double-edged sword there.
Right. I think that's very well put. So you mentioned passwords. I want to talk a little more about that. So how do you tell your kids to use good passwords? How do you tell your spouse to use good password? How do you ensure that it's happening?
So the first thing I did is I just made a requirement first. I made a requirement of how long the password needed to be. And it's pretty amazing. If you take a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old who's just learning how to read and write and type, and you just get the mindset of your password needs to be 10 characters, 12 characters, 14 characters, they don't think anything of it. They're like, oh, okay, whatever. And I would teach them how to use a passphrase, a couple of small words together, because usually that's kind of what they're learning anyway. But if that's all they know, they don't have a problem with it. I've never had any of my kids have a problem with the passwords. In fact, maybe I'm not as proud of this, but you put them against one another. Like, you tell my daughters that if they don't have a good password, that the son's going to get into their computer. And by God, they're going to make the best password they absolutely can because they don't want their brother in the computer. So I might have used those tactics, but they never had a problem with creating long passwords.
Right. Okay. That's good. So what do you think about a password manager? Or I guess we're leaning more towards, how do you ensure that they're doing that, though?
So I do have a password manager that we as a family use, that me and my wife use, and that the kids, they don't have access to the password manager. They still have to come to us to get the password for things. Since my wife and I use it, we use the passwords for the kids' accounts, of their games accounts, their email accounts, their variety of other things in the password manager, so that we could both do it. I mean, that was really the original intent, so we could both help the kids when we need to. Now the kids have their own passcodes that are unique to them for their profiles on their computers, which I'm perfectly okay with the understanding that I have the ability to go in and take a look at what anything that's on there. And I've been very fortunate that if something happens on the computers, they are right there to me, telling me, Dad, there's something weird going on here. I went to this website by accident. And so I got very lucky. I've got some great kids, and I've started on young to help them with the password thing, with being careful of the content on the internet, using the computer. If there's a problem, come to me quickly or come to Mom. And so we've kind of set up a really good system. I like password managers so that we can do that. We make sure that everyone has a different password, so we don't reuse passwords, of course. We generally don't share passwords among each other. The kids share them with us so we can put in the password manager, but we don't want each other using the same password. Now, I take that, there are a couple of computers in the house that have a shared password so they can use it for a particular purpose, whether for a variety of things. But those aren't their computers. Those are, mommy's iPad, a particular iPad for a particular purpose. But otherwise, different passwords for everyone, strong passwords, use a password manager. And eventually, what I'm going to do is the kids are going to have their own password manager account. It'd be like an enterprise level password manager. That's what we have now. So that they can get in and start storing their own passwords, but I'll still be able to see them.
Okay. So going back towards the beginning of our conversation, if I was pretending to be somebody calling your kids or your spouse and saying, hey, I need you to do this for Jonathan. He can't come to the phone right now. How do you get them aware of that, and how do you protect them against that? Because I have a couple ideas for some protections, but again, I'm not in the position to be doing that.
So I think one problem we have is that will immediately put a fear in the kids, and that's really hard to deal with when they're afraid.
Sure.
Last night my son came to me. It was about 1:00 in the morning, and he goes, "Daddy, I'm afraid someone's going to break in the house." Breaks my heart when they have that fear, and it's like, okay, well, why do you feel that way? And you work through it. Eventually, you get him to go back to sleep, and then you're thinking, it's like, what could I have done different to where he's not afraid of that? And then the flip side of it is, I want him to be afraid of that, because I want him to be afraid of someone breaking into the house, and what is he going to do when that happens? But the number one thing that I was so proud of him is he immediately came to me. He came to me and said, "Daddy, I'm afraid of this." That's what I wanted, because then I could work through it. So I think that that's really hard, because when someone plays on the fears of children, number one, that really bothers me. I don't want kids afraid, except when we're doing correct training. I want them to be afraid of that punch coming to their nose or someone grabbing them while they're walking down the street. And I want them to be aware of that, but you don't want to scare them too badly. So I think there's a balance. I think you absolutely have to tell them. So you have to have a scenario. I hope they never listen to this episode, because I have talked to someone, a friend of mine, who they don't know. I intend to utilize him in the future in a scenario where they are out and about and see what their reactions are. We have talked about that. We have trained that. We know they kind of know what they're supposed to do. But he's kind of a scary dude. He'll listen to this probably. At least I'll make sure he does. So he'll think that's funny. But he's kind of a scary dude, and I want him to come up and grab one of the kids and see what happens, because I need to know what that response is going to be, because I know what I've trained them. I know what we've taught them, but I need to know what the response actually is going to be.
Make sure he wears a cup.
Yes, that's probably an attack vector that I teach my kids.
You should. So one thing that my parents did whenever I was young is they had a password, but it was like over the phone. If somebody wants to come pick you up from school, make sure you have a code word. Right.
Yep.
I think that's something that's probably good to do even today, to have, if that call is, okay, what did he say the code word is?
Yeah. So that is actually an old way of doing it from picking kids up at school.
Right.
What is the code word?
Right.
My family and I have that. And it started with just my wife and I, because we had kids for a long time, and then we have kids. And absolutely. Now, that code word has a very particular use for us. I never thought about it from, hey, such and such is on the phone wanting information, because my response is hang up on them.
Right.
Hang up, but don't answer the door, and hang up on them.
Yeah.
It's
but you can make some pretty convincing scenarios.
I know. But that's something that I am now going to think about, because, again, if you personally, if Tanner were to call my house right now, well, number one, no one would know you. So hopefully they would just hang up on you at that point, because they don't know you. I mean, they've heard your name and such. I think my wife knows what you look like just from pictures and stuff. But that may be a really hard one, because she's going to think that it's work-related or whatever. Right. So I'm going to have to think about that and think about what the drills that we can do to protect against that.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you have anything else? Any other things that you're doing to kind of, keep your family safe from both a a family perspective, as well as somebody trying to commit corporate espionage through the family.
Well, I mean, for me personally, and this is what I teach people this at the organizational level too, but take care of your network, take care of your computers, good password management, security awareness training, drills, test this stuff. Another one I think people really, so I started this a few years ago. I actually stopped calling it security awareness training, and started calling it attack awareness training. And it's less about talking about the defenses that we're doing and more about talking about the attacks that were coming in. Because there's a dozen different ways to defend against the attacks. But when you talk about defense awareness training or attacks awareness training, these are the things that this person is going to call you. Period. That's the attack. And you can talk about, well, don't give out information over the phone. Don't do this, don't do this. But people are they're thinking about that defense part. But when you specifically say they're calling you to social engineer you, they're calling you to attack you, that's a different mindset. So that's one of the things that I do a little differently is when I talk to my wife or we talk about the actual attacks. This is the ways that these people can get in. Talk about on the accounts, talk about, perfect example. I hadn't thought about this before it happened. I mean, I've thought about it, but not about it. We had a check stolen out of the mailbox one day. And my first question is, well, first of all, why do we have a check in the mailbox? But it was some company had asked for her to write a check and send it to them because you live out in rural Oklahoma. Sometimes that's what they want. And it's like, no, don't do that. And this is what happened. And the account got cleared and whatever. So it's that specific attack of someone's going to get in the mailbox. They're going to take that check. They're going to take the ink off. They're going to rewrite the ink. And now they've got one of our checks with our routing numbers, with our signatures, with the numbers taken off. And it's like, oh, I never thought of that. Mm-hmm. But now that you know that the attack is there, you're very careful putting anything in the mailbox. Now, that's a whole other story, and it was actually a lot of fun to see the process after that, because the postal inspectors, the armed postal inspectors, they're kind of impressive, by the way.
I know that was a thing.
Oh, yeah. Sheriffs ignored us. The police department ignored us. But when we called the postal inspector, man, they had people up there the next day. They were going to Walmart. They were getting the fees. They were doing everything that you expected law enforcement to do. But because it's a federal crime to get into someone's mailbox.
Right.
They're serious about it. Anyway, whole different story, whole different time.
Right on.
But those are the types of things that I do. Is I talk about the attacks, and my wife knows what I do and knows what we do here, and so she's aware of those things. But sometimes it's just we'll see something online or on TV, and she go, "Is that possible?" It's just like what your significant other does. Yes, it is. This is what we did at this event. Maybe it's doing my hacker tool show and tell at an event and show how to break into doors and whatever. This is how we do that. And she's like, "That's crazy. That's stupid simple." Yes, it is. That's the problem. It's simple and it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing like, especially the physical side. That's a whole other talk, but the physical side of stuff, that's what really opens people's eyes, I feel like, where it's like, oh yeah, I have lockpicks in my pocket that you'd never know I had, and I can pick that in 3 seconds. Be in the house, no problem. Don't worry about it. You forgot your key, no problem.
Or you could pick a lock with a water bottle on the fly.
Allegedly.
There's a whole story about that as well. So, that, and I mean, that really is a realization thing. It's, do you know it's possible? Do you know it's effective? And I mean, everything we do is kind of fantasy anyway, until you realize just how effective it is. Hacking a computer with a vulnerability. The first time I ever did that years ago when I was learning trades, like, this was easy. First time you pick a lock. First time you bypass a lock. First time you social engineer someone. So first time you get into an organization without them questioning you. It's like, it's easy. That's That's wild. I think we are now at a level in which a lot of organizations, not all of them, but a lot of them are improving their security. So it's getting harder to get into the organizations, whether it's through the network or physical or whatever. So now the attackers are having to use different tactics to get in.
Right.
And that's why we're talking about our families, because that is a major vulnerability. So now let's talk about kind of something completely different. Same topic. If I'm an attacker and I am attacking a family, I really don't care about what happens to them.
No, you only care about the end result.
Yeah. So if I hurt your family, or if I hurt you, again, I'm the attacker. But if I ruin your relationship with your spouse, I put emotional damage on your kids. I mean, let's think about it. Let's think about, I use this as an example when we were on the radio show. An attacker convinces a child, on a Roblox game. So they think it's just someone they're playing with in a Roblox, but they say, hey, listen, if you don't do this thing, I'm going to have your daddy fired. And you've got a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old playing this. What are they going to think? I mean, what are they going to think? It's like, oh my God, I don't want my daddy to get fired. What are they going to do?
Mm-hmm.
You would hope that the child would come to you and say, hey, there's someone that's threatening you.
Right.
But do we know that that's what the kid's going to do?
Well, they can also say, if you say anything to him, even if you say anything to your dad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, the attacker says, if you don't download and install this thing for me, I'm going to get your daddy fired.
Yep.
I mean, that's scary. That's scary for a little kid.
Oh yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
now they think, if I make a decision that my daddy could get fired, and that's not nice. I mean, you think about it from the attacker's point of view, they don't care. They're just doing it. But from the kid's point of view and the parents' point of view, that's terrible. There was I was listening to a podcast or watching a podcast, a streamcast, and they were talking about someone who, basically the person got accused of child pornography, but what they did is they AI'd his face on something else, on a different body with a child, and but they posted it online. And now he's accused of going after little kids. There are pictures. Even if they're not true, he's got to defend himself. So if I'm an attacker and I go, hey, if you don't give us your password and your MFA, I'm going to post these pictures online of you molesting this little kid. I mean, most people are going to go, oh my God. First of all, they're going to say no job's worth this. And, and that's a real thing, because I mean, think about the organizations. How many people are disgruntled in their job?
At least half.
Yeah. I mean, we see it online all the time on Reddit and everything else, where people talking about how bad they hate their job. They don't want to go in. They don't like their supervisor. So to them, they might go, I don't care about this job. So they might just give away their credentials anyway. Insider threat is a thing.
Also financially motivating people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, I'll send you a phishing email that you fall for. I'll give you $25,000 to do it.
Yes.
Like, all you're going to know is they fell for a phishing email.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to fire them for that. You'll just say, do better.
Yeah. Attribution's really hard at that point, because how can you prove they clicked on that link intentionally?
Right.
Yeah. But again, I'm an attacker. I don't care. I want the passwords. I want access to the systems. I want all the data that you have. I want to get access to the bank accounts. I want this. I want that. They'll use any tactic. So what do you have to do? Well, number one, you have to be aware that these attacks are viable, which I hope if you listen to this podcast, you now know these attacks are viable, and you should be scared of all these different tactics that an attacker will go after you personally, or your family personally, or your kids, your significant others, your friends. They're coming after you.
Yeah.
And you may not know it right away. You might just say, oh, I'm getting a lot of spam to your email. How do you know you're not getting targeted?
Also, tell your pen testers to take the gloves off.
Yes.
Let them do it. They, chances are they want to anyways. Like, although I will tell you, sometimes I'm about to send a fish or do something like that, and I'm like, I kind of feel bad about this one.
I recently put together an episode of something else that was talking about how CISOs view pen tests. And some CISOs view a pen test as targeting their stuff, like they're deficient in doing security. And some CISOs, they look at it as, I need help. I need people to test this for me. So those are the sorts of things you got to think about in terms of doing this. Now, that mindset of, all right, take those off. I need to know what can be done. Because pen test is a snapshot in time, by the way. And it doesn't cover everything, possible.
Right.
But it does show you things that work in your organization. And in cases like this, and we do them, where you've got a corporate pen test that we go after the families of the executives or high-risk people or even low-risk people. Because if we can use that to get into the organization, then that gets us in. And we can do so much once we're in. But that really is the benefit of a real pen test, is all out, let's see what works. And if you go in with the right mindset as a CISO or a CIO or whoever, it could be so beneficial. Let the pen test happen. Will it be embarrassing sometimes? Maybe. Last pen test that I had as a CISO on my organization, I almost fell for the phishing. I was reading the email and I was looking at it. I was like, that looks real. And I ignored it. Fortunately, I didn't fall for anything. But I know they were targeting me, as they should have. And I know the email. I can describe it right now of why it was so good. But it was, it turned out not to be real. Had I fallen for it, I would want them to tell me, hey, Kimmitt, you fell for this. All right, I need to do better. But that's the point of the pen test, is to see where you need to do better in your organization.
Yeah, and we can go deep into, spear phishing sometime to talk about how ridiculous it can get and how some of the stuff we've done. And we'll be doing our After Dark segment of the podcast also. And that might be a good topic for that. We can get some of our guys in there and kind of hang out and talk about some of our war stories about some spear phishing stuff. So
yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right. It looks like we're getting up to the end of the podcast. I really appreciate Tanner. Thank you for coming on and joining me on this.
Thanks for having me.
This was a lot of fun. I think this is a really important topic. I honestly think that we can cover this again. We'll see about the feedback of other people, what people would like to see. I wouldn't mind actually sitting down and going through some very specific tactics and specific defenses on there, get more of a technical level. But this is really important. I think it's important for everyone to truly realize what kind of vulnerability this is, what kind of risks are out there for this, but also know that this is really no different than the risk in the organization. It's things that we already do to mitigate the risks, security awareness training. There are some technical controls. There's just awareness about the attacks. And doing those things will help you so much, not only your family, but your corporate level, that it's really important to do that. So thank you again, and we appreciate you taking the opportunity to listen to the podcast. We've got another podcast, I think, next week or so. You guys have a great evening, afternoon, or morning, depending on when you're watching this, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.